Hello, listening squirrels. Let me get my book up here. How are y'all doing this day? Ooh, this is glitchy. Oh well. Got new batteries. I believe it's time to put them in. Okay, doggone. Take me to where I was. This is at the beginning of the chapter. I'm going to try to remember where I was. Since I read this twice, that's not going to be easy done, I don't think. Oh, she never scolds. Is that it? But then Shirley is the only one of us she never scolds. I think that was where we were. If not, I might be repeating part of it, but that's better than leaving something out. Faith Meredith is wonderful. I think she and Jim are really engaged now. She goes about with a shining light in her eyes, but her smiles are a little stiff and starched, just like Mother's. I wonder if I could be as brave as she is if I had a lover and he was going to war. It's bad enough when it's your brother. Bruce Meredith cried all night, Mrs. Meredith says, when he heard Jim and Jerry were going. And he wanted to know if the K of K his father talked about was the King of Kings. He is the dearest kitty. Kitty, K-I-D-D-Y. I just love him, though I don't really care much for children. I don't like babies one bit. Though when I say so, people look at me as if I'd said something perfectly shocking. Well, I don't, and I've got to be honest about it. I don't mind looking at a nice, clean baby if someone else holds it, but I wouldn't touch it for anything, and I don't feel a single real spark of interest in it. Gertrude Oliver says she just feels the same. She is the most honest person I know. She never pretends anything. She says babies bore her until they're old enough to talk, and then she likes them, but still a good ways off. Mother and Nan and Di all adore babies and seem to think I'm unnatural because I don't. I haven't seen Kenneth since the night of the party. He was here one evening after Jim came back, but I happened to be away. I don't think he mentioned me at all. At least nobody told me he did, and I was determined I wouldn't ask. But I don't care in the least. Right. All that matters absolutely nothing to me now. The only thing that does matter is that Jim has volunteered for active service and will be going to Valcartier, maybe, in a few more days. My big, splendid brother Jim. Oh, I'm so proud of him. I suppose Kenneth would enlist too if it weren't for his ankle. I think that's quite providential. He is his mother's only son, and how dreadful she would feel if he went. Only sons should never think of going. Walter came wandering through the valley as Rilla sat there with his head bent and his hands clasped behind him. When he saw Rilla, he turned abruptly away. Then as abruptly he turned and came to her. Rilla, my Rilla, what are you thinking of? Everything is so changed, Walter, said Rilla wistfully. Even you're changed. A week ago we were all so happy, and now I just can't find myself at all. I'm lost. Walter sat down on a neighboring stone and took Rilla's little appealing hand. I'm afraid our old world has come to an end, Rilla. We've got to face that fact. It's so terrible to think of, Jim, pleaded Rilla. Sometimes I forget for a little while what it really means and feel excited and proud, and then it comes over me again like a cold wind. I envy Jim, said Walter moodily. Envy Jim? Oh, Walter, you don't want to go too. No, said Walter, gazing straight before him down the emerald vistas of the valley. No, I don't want to go. That's just the trouble, Rilla. I'm afraid to go. I'm a coward. You're not, Rilla burst out angrily. Why, anybody would be afraid to go. You might be killed. I wouldn't mind that if it didn't hurt, muttered Walter. I don't think I'm afraid of death itself. It's of the pain that might come before death. It would be so bad to die. It wouldn't be so bad to die and have it over, but to keep on dying. Rilla, I've always been afraid of pain. You know that. I can't help it. I shudder when I think of the possibility of being mangled or blinded. Rilla, I cannot face that thought. To be blind, never to see the beauty of the world again. Moonlight on four winds, the stars twinkling through the fir trees, mist on the gulf. I ought to go. I ought to want to go, but I don't. I hate the thought of it. I'm ashamed. But Walter, you couldn't go anyhow, said Rilla piteously. She was sick of a new terror that Walter would go after all. You're not strong enough. I am. I felt as fit as ever I did this last month. I'd pass any examination. I know it. Everybody thinks I'm not strong yet, and I'm skulking behind that belief. I should have been a girl, Walter concluded in a burst of passionate bitterness. Even if you were strong enough, you oughtn't to go, sobbed Rilla. What would Mother do? She's breaking her heart over Jim. It would kill her to see you both go. Oh, I'm not going. Don't worry. I tell you, I'm afraid to go. Afraid. I don't mince the matter to myself. It's a relief to own up, even to you, Rilla. I wouldn't confess it to anybody else. Nan and Di would despise me. But I hate the whole thing, the horror, the pain, the ugliness. War isn't a khaki uniform or a drill parade. Everything I've read in old histories haunts me. I lie awake at night and see things that have happened, see the blood and filth and misery of it all. And a bayonet charge. If I could face the other things, I could never face that. It turns me sick to think of it. Sicker even to think of giving it than receiving it, to think of thrusting a bayonet through another man. Walter writhed and shuddered. I think of these things all the time, and it doesn't seem to me that Jim and Jerry ever think of them. They laugh and talk about potting Huns, but it maddens me to see them in the khaki. And they think I'm grumpy because I'm not fit to go. Walter laughed bitterly. It's not a nice thing to feel yourself a coward. But Rilla got her arms about him and cuddled her head on his shoulder. She was so glad he didn't want to go. For just 1 minute she had been horribly frightened, and it was so nice to have Walter confiding his troubles to her, not Di. She didn't feel so lonely and superfluous any longer. Don't you despise me, Rilla, my Rilla? Asked Walter wistfully. Somehow it hurt him to think Rilla might despise him, hurt him as much as if it had been Di. He realized suddenly how very fond he was of this adoring kid sister with her appealing eyes and troubled, girlish face. No, I don't. Why, Walter, hundreds of people feel just as you do. You know what that verse of Shakespeare in the old Fifth Reader says. The brave man is not he who feels no fear. No, but it is he whose noble soul its fear subdues. I don't do that. We can't gloss it over, Rilla. I'm a coward. You're not. Think of how you fought Dan Reese long ago. One spurt of courage isn't enough for a lifetime. Walter, one time I heard Father say that the trouble with you was a sensitive nature and vivid imagination. You feel things before they really come. Feel them all alone when there isn't anything to help you bear them. Sorry. Page. To bear them. To take away from them. It isn't anything to be ashamed of. When you and Jim got your hands burned when the grass was fired on the sand hills 2 years ago, Jim made twice the fuss over the pain that you did. As for this horrid old war, there'll be plenty to go without you. It won't last long. I wish I could believe it. Well, it's supper time, really. You'd better run. I don't want anything. Neither do I. I couldn't eat a mouthful. Let me stay here with you, Walter. It's such comfort to talk things over with someone. The rest all think I'm too much of a baby to understand." So they two sat there in the old valley until the evening star shone through a pale gray gauzy cloud over the maple grove, and a fragrant dewy darkness filled their little sylvan dale. It was one of the evenings Rilla was to treasure and remembrance all her life, the first one on which Walter had ever talked to her as if she were a woman and not a child. They comforted and strengthened each other. Walter felt, for the time being at least, that it was not such a despicable thing after all to dread the horror of war, and Rilla was glad to be made the confidant of his struggles, to sympathize with and encourage him. She was of importance to somebody. When they went back to Ingleside, they found callers sitting on the veranda. Mr. and Mrs. Meredith had come over from the manse, and Mr. and Mrs. Norman Douglas had come up from the farm. Cousin Sophia was there also, sitting with Susan in the shadowy background. Mrs. Blythe and Nan and Di were away, but Dr. Blythe was home, and so was Dr. Jekyll, sitting in golden majesty on the top step. And of course they were all talking of the war, except Dr. Jekyll, who kept his own counsel and looked contempt as only a cat can. When two people foregathered in those days, they talked of the war, and old Highland Sandy of the Harbour Head talked of it when he was alone and hurled anathemas at the Kaiser across all the acres of his farm. Walter slipped away, not caring to see or be seen, but Rilla sat down on the steps where the garden mint was dewy and pungent. It was a very calm evening, with the dim golden afterlight radiating the glen. She felt happier than at any other time in the dreadful week that had passed. She was no longer haunted by the fear that Walter would go. "I'd go myself if I was 20 years younger," Norman Douglas was shouting. Norman always shouted when he was excited. "I'd show that Kaiser a thing or two. Did I ever say there wasn't a hell? Of course there's a hell, dozens of hells, hundreds of hells, where the Kaiser and all his brood are bound for." "I knew this war was coming," said Mrs. Norman triumphantly. "I saw it coming right along. I could have told all these stupid Englishmen what was ahead of them." "I told you, John Meredith, years ago of what the Kaiser was up to, but you wouldn't believe it. You said he would never plunge the world in war. Who was right about the Kaiser, John? You or I? Tell me that." "You were, I admit," said Mr. Meredith. "It's too late to admit it now," said Mrs. Norman, shaking her head as if to intimate that if John Meredith had admitted it sooner, there might have been no war. "Thank God England's navy is ready," said the doctor. "Amen to that," nodded Mrs. Norman. "Blind as most of them were, somebody had foresight enough to see to that." "Maybe England'll manage not to get into trouble over it," said Cousin Sophia plaintively. "I don't know. I'm much afraid." "One would suppose that England was in trouble over it already, up to her neck, Sophia Crawford," said Susan. "The wind is terrible." "But your ways of thinking are beyond me, and always were. It's my opinion that the British Navy will settle Germany in a jiffy, and that we are all getting worked up over nothing." Susan spat out the words as if she wanted to convince herself more than anybody else. She had her little store of homely philosophies to guide her through life, but she had nothing to buckler her against the thunderbolts of the week that had just passed. What had an honest, hard-working Presbyterian old maid of Glen St. Mary to do with a war thousands of miles away? Susan felt that it was indecent that she should have to be disturbed by it. "The British Army will settle Germany," shouted Norman. Just wait till it gets into line, And the Kaiser will find that real war is a different thing from parading round Berlin with your mustaches cocked up. Britain hasn't got an army, said Mrs. Norman emphatically. You needn't glare at me, Norman. Glaring won't make soldiers out of Timothy stalks. 100,000 men will just be a mouthful for Germany's millions. There'll be some tough chewing in the mouthful, I reckon, persisted Norman valiantly. Germany'll break her teeth on it. Don't you tell me one Britisher isn't a match for 10 foreigners. I could polish off a dozen of them myself with both hands tied behind my back. I am told, said Susan, that old Mr. Pryor does not believe in this war. I am told that he says England went into it just because she was jealous of Germany, and that she did not really care in the least what happened to Belgium. I believe he's talking some such rot, said Norman. I haven't heard him. When I do, Whiskers on the Moon won't know what happened to him. That precious relative of mine, Kitty Alec, holds forth to the same effect, I understand. Not before me, though. Somehow folks don't indulge in that kind of conversation in my presence. Lord love you, they're a kind of presentiment, so to speak, that it wouldn't be healthy for their complaint. I'm much afraid that this war has been sent as a punishment for all our sins, said Cousin Sophia, unclasping her pale hands from her lap and reclasping them solemnly over her stomach. The world is very evil. The times are waxing late. Parson here's got something of the same idea, chuckled Norman. Haven't you, Parson? That's why you preached the other night on the text, without shedding of blood there is no remission of sins. I didn't agree with you. Wanted to get up in the pew and shout out that there wasn't a word of sense in what you were saying, but Ellen here, she held me down. I never had any fun sassing Parsons since I got married. Without shedding of blood there is no anything, said Mr. Meredith in the gentle, dreamy way which had an unexpected trick of convincing his hearers. Everything, it seems to me, has to be purchased by self-sacrifice. Our race was marked every step of its painful ascent with blood, and now torrents of it must flow again. No, Mrs. Crawford, I don't think the war has been sent as a punishment for sin. I think it's the price humanity must pay for some blessing, some advance great enough to be worth the price, which we may not live to see, but our children's children will inherit. Supposed to be quieted. Doggone it. It was. I had the ringer turned off. It's weird. Children's children will inherit. If Jerry is killed, will you feel so fine about it? Demanded Norman, who'd been saying things like that all his life and never could be made to see any reason why he shouldn't. Now, never mind kicking me in the shins, Ellen. I want to see if Parson meant what he said, or if it was just a pulpit frill. Mr. Meredith's face quivered. He had had a terrible hour alone in his study on the night Jim and Jerry had gone to town, but he answered quietly, whatever I felt, it could not alter my belief, my assurance that a country whose sons are ready to lay down their lives in her defense will win a new vision because of their sacrifice. You do mean it, Parson. I can always tell when people mean what they say. It's a gift that was born in me, makes me a terror to most parsons, that. But I've never caught you yet saying anything you didn't mean. I'm always hoping I will. That's what reconciles me to going to church. It'd be such a comfort to me, such a weapon to battle Ellen here with when she tries. It'd be such a comfort to me, such a weapon to batter Ellen here with when she tries to civilize me. Well, I'm off over the road to see Ab Crawford a minute. The gods be good to you all. The old pagan, muttered Susan as Norman strode away. She did not care if Ellen Douglas did hear her. Susan could never understand why fire did not descend from heaven upon Norman Douglas when he had insulted ministers the way he did. But the astonishing thing was Mr. Meredith seemed really to like his brother-in-law. Rilla wished they would talk of something besides war. She had heard nothing else for a week, and she was really a little tired of it. Now that she was relieved from her haunting fear that Walter would want to go, it made her quite impatient, but she supposed with a sigh that there would be 3 or 4 months of it yet. That's all of Chapter 5, and Chapter 6, hopefully we'll get to tomorrow, is called Susan, Rilla, and Dog Monday Make a Resolution. Y'all have a wonderful, happy, crafty day. And I'll see you in the YouTube streets, especially if you come to Dana and Joe's Making Meat at 5:30 Eastern. I'm sure I'll be up on the panel for a while anyway. Love you bunches. Be sweet, don't be ugly. Bye-bye.